Welcome to the Big Fellas Podcast, where we chop it up about all things past, present, and future about the game of basketball. Where facts, stats, and context reign supreme.
That is blasphemous!
Sometimes it gets crazy, but we always keep it real. Get ready to learn from players, coaches, and fans from all levels of the game and see the court in a brand new way. And now, fresh off the sidelines, here's your host, John Hartofilis.
What it do, fellas, and welcome to the Big Fellas Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, JH, coming to you from New York City, the mecca of basketball. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Greg St. Jean, assistant coach for the Los Angeles Lakers. In this episode, we spoke about Coach Greg's experiences of getting into coaching while still playing, climbing the coaching ranks at a young age, and winning an NBA championship down in Orlando. We've got a good one in store for you today, fellas. Episode number 36, Greg St. Jean, LA Lakers assistant coach. Hey, Coach Greg, what's going on?
John, great to see you, man. How's everything going?
Things are going great, having a good day. I hope you're doing well yourself, and really can't wait to hear about all the cool stuff you've been doing over, obviously, your whole time in the basketball world, but even especially these last few months.
Yeah, definitely look forward to catching up. I'm happy to be here, man.
Just to start, kind of start where it all began. How did you first get into the game as a kid?
You know what? I'm not going to be naive and sit here and not mention my father. My dad was a basketball coach himself. So I always tell people I'm not necessarily born to coach, but I do feel like I was bred to coach with regard to being around. I was very blessed to be around a lot of great basketball minds growing up. My dad was an assistant coach with the Bucks, the Nets, and the Warriors, and then was the head coach of the Kings and the Warriors, and then general manager of the Warriors. So, growing up around that, I felt like I was always, I played other sports. I loved the game, but I always felt like everything pulled me back to basketball. And, I was really blessed to have the nature versus nurture basketball pull that happened with me, and gravity to pulling to the game. But, I always loved it. And I quickly found that I had an eye for it, that, come time, I grew up to try to play, but I ended up really wanting to coach.
You did play in college for a little bit, though. When did you I realized that you, as much as you enjoyed playing, it was time to make the transition to coaching, and that was going to be what you were going to continue to do?
Yeah, you know what? I played in college. I played Division III, which I know you're familiar with. I played at Wesleyan University in Connecticut, and I actually had a pretty injury-ridden career. When I was in high school, when I was a freshman in high school, I was 5'3", and now I'm 6'4". And so I grew late. I grew after my senior year of high school. I got recruited by a great coach in Joe Riley at Wesleyan University. And I went to Phillips Exeter for a year. So I did a postgraduate year between high school at De La Salle in Northern California, went to Phillips Exeter for a year and wanted to go to a high academic school, and ended up going to Wesleyan University. Had a decent year my freshman year, and we had a good young team. But I ended up then after that only playing about 8 to 9 more games the rest of my career. Tore my ACL twice. I broke my wrist. I had a few surgeries on my hip. So I think nature took its cause on me and made that shift. I always tried to come back and play because I really wanted to be around my teammates and felt like I needed to get back out there. But there was a huge mental shift for me at that point where I said, hey, I'm probably not going to go overseas for a couple years and play and pursue professional basketball as a career path as a player. And so, I ended up being able to sit in on my coaches' meetings with my college coach, was able to work things when I was, home during the summer. And that was all during my rehab. But there's a mental side of rehab that, you want to keep your mind clear. And to me, to have some purpose about trying to get into coaching or front office or focusing a little bit more on the day-to-day operations of basketball and the technical and tactical things as opposed to the physical helped me.
Of course. And you must have learned so much sitting in those meetings and learning from the first internship you did with the Nets while you were still in school. That must have really opened your eyes too, I guess, on the professional side of things, more so than what you'd already been experiencing in college.
100%. And I tell people all the time, it was a huge humility check for me. Like I said, I grew up around basketball. I grew up around having access to phenomenal basketball minds, growing up and sitting in on meetings and going to my dad's practices and doing those things. But then when you're the one now out there doing it yourself, you better know what you're talking about, and you better be organized and you better be up to speed on kind of what everyone's expectations are. So, I got that opportunity. Once again, I said, I'm not naive. I got that opportunity through a connection through my father. At the time, he was actually working for the Nets. Billy King was the general manager and Avery Johnson was the GM. And they were nice enough to let me come down for a week when school ended. And after spending some time with them and me being a little aggressive with how I wanted to be there all summer, they said that they'd have no problem with me being around. So I stayed the whole summer. Found myself kind of staying at different people's houses, sometimes sleeping in my car, just doing some different things in ways in which to be able to show up to the office every single day. Learned from a lot of great mentors there and got a good sense of both the coaching side, the basketball operations side, and kind of how everything works together.
It's easy to say like, oh, how crazy is it to have an opportunity like that at such a young age? But you had to really work once you got there to be able to show up every day and be your best self and work super hard so that at the conclusion of those months, you were a much better, whether it's applicant or coach or whatever it might be, than you were when you got in just a few months before that. So that's great because the transformation there is really key in terms of setting up all your future, but not current successes now. I mean, obviously, then you started going into kind of the video room with the Kings. That's obviously like a lot of great coaches start in the video room, whether it's with Eric Spoelstra, the coach of the Heat, and even Frank Vogel doing that way back when. How much did that prepare you kind of for where you are now in terms of being in that video room and taking a path that it has seemed to work out for so many other people?
Yeah, you know what? I don't mean to use the term humility again, but it truly was a humbling experience going into the NBA video room. And I got a taste of that with the Nets before I got to Sacramento. And you talk about trying to earn it and work. One thing that I do love about the way the NBA is set up is it's a glamorous job when you use those three letters, NBA, when you say I work in the NBA. But the lower tier level jobs of the NBA are pretty thankless. They're pretty similar to a manager in college, a student manager in college or a graduate assistant or somebody who's, really at the bottom level. You're doing some laundry, you're working the clock, you're doing all these things. And so if you have an ego, you got to check that at the door, or else you're not going to be very successful. But from a technical, tactical standpoint, the video room is extremely helpful. Being around some of the best basketball minds, that's the highest level of the game, right? And so the preparation level there is incredible. I always try to give a tremendous credit to the players. I think the players are extremely smart. Their basketball IQ is extremely high. So you have to have all the ways in which to stimulate them. And a lot of that has to do with your preparation and your video. So that's why the video room has become such a huge part of preparation, but also such a unique place to start your career in some capacity, because you have such a great foundation of what your team is doing, right? All of your plays, all of your sets, your drills, and those things, terminology. But then on the other flip side is the idea of preparing for the opponent and personnel and the strategy that goes into that. So the video room was great. Obviously, like you said, and at the time I was working for Michael Malone, who also was a former video guy, who's a former non-former player, right? So that's something for me when I consider myself a former player. That only goes so far. At the NBA level, you either played in the NBA or you didn't, right? So I'm a non-former player coach trying to become an NBA head coach. And so some of the guys that I've tried to surround myself with or learn from, I've been very blessed, have gone through a similar path. Coach Malone was one of them, and that's what was attractive about that opportunity. You mentioned Coach Spoelstra, who's obviously been a trailblazer in how to go about doing things. And then Frank Vogel, who I'm working for right now, has been incredible from a learning aspect as well.
All these things that might be obstacles to overcome in the league. Another thing is kind of being a young coach, or maybe when you first started, not having too much experience under your belt because you're only 22, 23, 24 years old. Can you kind of speak on that? Because I feel it's something that, I try to touch on a lot with this show, being that most guests are on the younger side of things. I'm obviously a 20-year-old high school coach trying to see where I can get my foot into the league. So it's always interesting to hear about what it's like, obviously being young in the NBA, and then also like how that relates to the way you talk to players that might be older than you or other coaches. And what if you can kind of speak on that?
So I think it's a great question, John. I really think one of the biggest aspects of your player-coach relationship is the understanding that the player knows your intentions are there to get them better, right? And I'm sure you've heard that before. and you probably have that built out with a lot of the players you work with, is the ways in which they know and believe in you, that you are there to get them better, that it's not just you using them to get yourself in a better foot in the better opportunity. So that's a big thing, is getting that awareness out there and letting that conversation come into place. And it has to be organic, right? You can't force that. But I think putting yourself out there almost like as a servant leader and being somebody who's there to serve the players, I think is critical. But I think one of the other aspects that was helpful and still is helpful today, right? I'm 30. I'm still quote unquote a young coach, where, LeBron is 35. He's still older than I am, and obviously been through a lot more intense experiences in the basketball world than I have. But I think there's a respect that comes from the willingness to learn from the players, right? And I think a lot of young coaches make the mistake in often trying to tell everybody or tell their players what they know. And I think there's some value in the idea of asking questions to the players and asking them, hey, is this something that when you play, like asking LeBron or asking Rondo, is like, hey, in 2007, when you were in the playoffs and you guys were down in this situation, how did you guys make the shift and what were the things that you went about doing? As opposed to saying, you could go research it yourself, right? And I could come out and say, hey, yeah, in 2007, I saw that you guys changed the zone defense in that. How was that? They're going to go, they'll answer it. But I think there's a certain curiosity that comes where if you can acknowledge as a coach that you don't know everything, and there's an acknowledgement that they're the ones out there performing, no matter what level you're at, high school, college, pro, that you can try to put yourselves in their shoes without you always telling them the answers and letting them kind of search and find them. I think you can find the back and forth to be a little bit more organic and healthy. And then during times of stress, during a game, being able to ask them, hey, what do you see out there? It's not the first time that they've spoken. So often when you want to talk to your point guard and he's making a read and trying to find things out there, and you go to him and you finally ask him, but you've been in a relationship where you're constantly coaching him and telling him, he's going to freeze, or he's going to be so excited to get that opportunity to speak, he's going to speak a million miles per minute. So I just think that there's a relationship level in the two things, like I said, conveying through your actions and words that you're there to get them better, and then not being afraid to take a step back, personalize the relationship, and make sure that there is a back and forth with some questions.
That's so key, and it must have helped you so much, I would imagine, to have that personal relationship with them. And that's something I strive to do too as a young coach. I'm much closer to them in age than some of the 50 or 60-year-olds in the program. They know I care, but if I change my language up a little bit, the points might come across a little bit smoother. So that's great.
And you know what, John? I'm going to be the first to tell you, I'm still growing in that aspect. Like, let me be the first to tell you that is something that I actually take it to off the court studying. Like, to me, that is a focal point of my coaching growth, is being able to improve that, because so much of coaching, right, is relationship based. So much of coaching is a psychology in which you deal with the athletes. And so I'm still learning in that regard. I've been reading, some things on that and trying to get better and trying to make sure that I can equip myself with all the tools possible to be able to handle different situations. And you mentioned the idea of not being much older than the players. I had that opportunity and have had it now. But when I was at St. John's, it was the same thing. My first year, I was a 25-year-old assistant coach, and we had a 23-year-old graduate player who was a fifth-year player. The ways in which that I can communicate with him, I can probably relate to him in some better ways than maybe some other people on the staff. But at the same time, being able to set the boundaries of the player-coach relationship, being able to understand the difference between being their friend and being somebody there who's a mentor and there to help them, that doesn't shut on and off, right? You have to be able to find the ways in which to maintain that professionalism with them, which is tough at times, because there's going to be situations where they're going to come and vent to you, and they're going to be vulnerable, and they're going to hit you at a time where you're upset about something, and you might reveal some information that you shouldn't be revealing, right? So being able to create that relationship where it's still professional, still business, but at the end of the day, it's human to human. And that's such an important thing, is recognizing who they are as a person first before they're an athlete.
Human to human, that's the biggest thing, to always keep that in perspective. And you brought up your time with St. John's, and obviously with a head coach like Chris Mullin, you must have learned so much from that, both from all of his experiences in the basketball world, as well as all the stuff he must have shared in terms of game preparation that season. What did you kind of take away from that experience going into your current job with the Lakers?
So, like I said, I'm not going to be naive. I've known Chris Mullin since I was a little kid. My dad coached him when he was with the Warriors, and I had the opportunity to work with him in Sacramento for 2 years. And when he got the St. John's opportunity, I'll be honest with you, I never had any interest in coaching in college, but because he was a dear friend, somebody who was going back to his alma mater, and somebody I really believed in from a basketball acumen and IQ standpoint, it was an incredible opportunity for me to create my coaching voice. It was a credible opportunity for me to get my hands dirty a little bit and really get a chance to coach on the floor at a level that, I really hadn't experienced in the NBA. And my thought process when I was going there was, hey, this is not going to I'm now not going to be a part of a linear path, right? There's going to be some pivot points, and my end goal is to be an NBA head coach. And I think everybody was telling me, hey, if you want to be an NBA head coach, get into the video room, then go to player development, then go to an assistant coach, then go to front of the bench, then go to head coach, right? And they gave you these path points. And in my first 2 years, I had already hit two of them because we had some coaching changes. We had 3 coaches in 2 years in Sacramento. And so I was already on the player development side, at age 24, turning 25, and was well on my way, I think, to be, potentially working my way up the ladder. But I honestly felt like I was on an expedited track, and going to St. John's gave me the ability to, like I said, learn from Chris Mullin, and Mitch Richmond was there. I talked earlier about the opportunity to learn from coaches who've been in my same pathway. And I know that you interviewed Tommy Shepard the other day, and it was really, awesome for you to talk to him, because you said he sits in a chair of a job that you eventually want to sit in, right? And so it was probably great for you to pick his brain. The same thing goes for me as when I talk to non-former players who are head coaches. I'd love to hear about the struggles and the things that you have to overcome. But there's also the other side of the coin of, I need to surround myself with some former players. And I think there's no better to do than the great players, right? And to surround yourself with people who can give you this wealth of knowledge, wealth of experience, like a Chris Mullin, who's played for phenomenal coaches. He's won Olympic gold medals. He shared a locker room with Michael Jordan. He's had all of these incredible experiences. And more importantly than all of that, he loved the game. And I think that that's a huge thing, that if you can have people that you're around that love the game at the same level you do or did, it only makes the work environment better, because you know that they're pure in the ways in which they try to attack their job. So working with Chris Mullin was phenomenal for me. Like I said, I'm biased. I grew up knowing him. I think he was awesome. Our first year at St. John's, we won 8 games. The next year we won 14. The next year we won 16. The next year we won 21. So there's mixed opinions on how that experience was. But, I've always said that I thought Chris did a phenomenal job there. He was great to work for. He brought some energy and life back to Madison Square Garden, which I think was pretty cool for us. And we had some, a roller coaster ride, some good seasons, some bad seasons, but we're proud of some of the things we did there. And, we beat Villanova on the road when they were number 1 in the country. We beat Duke, we beat Syracuse twice. We had some big wins that were really memorable, and some amazing experiences that I'll remember for the rest of my life. And like I said, getting the opportunity to be a little bit more in charge of some of our game planning and some of our prep, overseeing our whole video and player development department, our analytics, the ways in which we did things at St. John's, really helped prepare me for the current role I'm in with the Lakers, because I really felt very confident in anything that was thrown my way. I've at least experienced in some capacity something in the same realm and something in the same line, that if Coach Vogel throws something at me, it's not the first time I've had to do it.
First off, thank you so much for listening to the Tommy Shepard episode. That was a really big one for me, like you said, because I told him you're one of 30 people to sit in a chair that I hope to sit in one day. And I could completely relate to what you're saying of being in the same room as these great former players, coaches, and picking their brains, because that's something you want to do. And that's just how it is. And it's such an honor to kind of be able to have the opportunity to take just a little bit from all these the people that are mentors to you, and people that you hope to be like one day. So that's great. And off that last point of what you're saying of getting all that preparation in the St. John's room enabled you to kind of make that switch to the Lakers job, which is honestly, obviously a super, super, super cool position and the experience of being around that team even before they were champion, just in terms of how good they were, is awesome. And then now, after the experience you guys just had in the bubble, must have been fantastic.
Yeah. So when Coach Mullin resigned from St. John's in 2019, the spring of 2019, I stayed on at St. John's for a couple weeks and tried to kind of hold down the fort there with some of our kids, and interviewed for the head coaching job, and had some great back and forth with their administration and the athletic director. They ended up going in a different direction and hired Mike Anderson, who's the current head coach there. No disrespect to Coach Anderson. My feel was if I wasn't going to be the head coach, I was going to make a pivot point for myself to get back to the NBA. The administration understood that, athletic director, everybody kind of understood that, hey, if I didn't get the head coaching job, I wasn't going to come back. And I had great conversation with Coach Anderson to try to help him navigate and prepare for the next coming season with the players we had and everything. And so, I'm single. I don't have a family. I don't have any kids. I don't have a dog. And so I felt like now was the time for myself to try to get back into the NBA. And me having such a phenomenal role at St. John's. And like I said, I'm not naive to it. It was incredible, the involvement I had and the voice and the say that I had because of my relationship with Chris and our trust level with each other. It was going to be interesting to take a few steps back in that regard, going back to the NBA. So in doing so, I was looking around. There's a few opportunities out there with some teams that were exciting. I looked at a few G League opportunity, head coaching opportunities. There was a few other colleges that were calling about assistant coaching roles, and a few NBA teams that had some behind the bench assistant jobs, which are great opportunities and things that I was excited about. But the one that ended up standing out the most was the Lakers. And at the time, Frank Vogel had just been named the head coach. We had a little bit of a pre-existing relationship, but not much. And we had gone back and forth about trying to find a role or trying to find something that fit what I was looking for. And unfortunately, we really couldn't. We couldn't find something that was like mutually beneficial for both of us, that we thought was a good fit based on some of the things that had come up. And we kept in touch. And it was unique that we had a situation where we interviewed, we had a sit down, we had a great meal, we talked about it. And if you were to leave that meal to that day, you probably wouldn't have thought that I was going to be part of the Lakers staff, just because we weren't sure where we were going to go with it. And we touched base about 2 months later as things were progressing with some of these other jobs. And we reactivated our talks and found a way that we thought could stimulate my brain and still give me a chance to really grow. And so the role I had this year was really unique. I'm one of the only guys in the league that actually do it. It's a hybrid coaching and scouting role. And I think they're kind of built for somebody like myself who doesn't have a family because I was not home very often. And so my job as a coach was when anytime I was around the team was to coach, be a part of our player development workouts, obviously part of our coaching staff meetings, help in our preparation, work with our video group and work with the rest of our staff and our assistants. From a scouting standpoint, my job was to make sure that I was an opponent specialist. So anytime I was around the team, if they have a question about rotations, they have a question about how often do they play zone, they have a question about how many possessions per game, are they going to be running certain things, calls, alignments. Basically, my job was to be somebody who could, on the fly, very quickly answer any questions that we have about the opponent. And that's for all 29 other teams, as well as being somebody who could almost be, we call it the Rosetta Stone of our analytics group. So our analytics group will put together a huge report, and my job is to be able to decipher that and translate that into basketball context for us to make sure that we're making the proper preparation. So that was my job when I was there. But to get all that info, I had to go out on the road. So the nights when we weren't playing, I would travel. And if we were playing in LA on a Thursday and we're playing Memphis, I'd go to our game versus Memphis, and I'd take a 6 a.m. flight out the next morning and fly to Dallas, go see Dallas play. Then the next morning, right? So Friday, go to the game, and then Saturday morning, fly back and fly in for our game Saturday versus the Pelicans. And so I always had to be a few steps ahead. And when we'd be on the road, during the middle of the road trip, I would leave and come back. And so it was a phenomenal opportunity for me to almost get a PhD back into the NBA. Having missed, the last 4 years, I kept in touch with trends and the ways in which, the league was going and how often teams were switching and things of that nature. But it was a great role for me this past year because it really gave me an opportunity to truly learn every single coach, their offense and defensive system, their terminology, their alignments, their strategy, their game to game changes in which they're trying to do, and almost have a macro view on the league as a whole. Is being able to say, hey, this year more than 2017, 2018, we're seeing more pin downs. This year, we're seeing more switching. We're seeing more zone defense. Who's the best at zone defense? Who's the best at 3-2? So all these different things, you have a wealth of knowledge, and you got to organize it. You got to be able to try to figure all those things out. But it was an incredible role, and Frank Vogel gave me an opportunity that was great, where I was able to maximize all the different parts of the role that I wanted to. So, if I wanted to be around the team more and coach with us and strictly do that, I was there for a full 10 days at a time, as opposed to having to go out. Certain teams you need to prepare more for than others. The Houston Rockets, you're going to see a lot of isolation basketball. Probably not critical for me to go live to go get a play call that's ISO, right? So it was just a really unique role. I would only recommend somebody doing it as if they have the ability to operate on very little sleep. They're not paranoid of flying a lot, and they're not afraid of getting up early in the morning. But awesome experience this year, and obviously culminated in the best way possible with winning the championship. But really, really unique experience to work with some really good coaches: Frank Vogel, Jason Kidd, Lionel Hollins, all guys who've been former head coaches, like we alluded to. Being able to be around those people who sit in the seat you want to get to, A, and then B, being around some really, really high level players that are incredibly intelligent with elite level IQ was like I said, a PhD year for me.
Thank you so much for that description of everything you've been doing, because that's so awesome. And the three things you mentioned they have to do: sleep, not be afraid of flying, wake up early. All that stuff is stuff that anyone can do that. Anyone, but no one wants to. The reason why you're in the position you are is because you're willing to do those three things when most people, 99% of people, would rather sleep in, would rather, maybe they don't want to fly all over the place. And I also laughed when you said that it's great that you don't have a family, a dog, all that, because I've had coaches on this show and I've had scouts on this show, and you do both, but all they do is tell me about how crazy it is with the flying schedule, and especially the scouts, and you do both of those jobs. So for you, I mean, it's really important, I think, that you don't have a wife, kids, dog, the whole thing.
No, and you're right. And you know what? And the goal is to eventually have those things, right? And is being able to find the ways in which to attack these jobs and these opportunities while you have them, and have the freedom to really only worry about yourself. As you continue to get older and you continue to have those situations where you have relationships and others to care about, that's when you got to be a little more organized with your time, and being able to juggle all those things and compartmentalize family time versus personal time and things of that nature. So I think you're right. I think you're right on. There's some quote unquote sacrifices that you need to make in this job. And in any of these jobs in the NBA, you talked about, you've had scouts, you've had, coaches, you've had former players. And I go back to this: is the sacrifice that you're making is, if you really love it, it's not a sacrifice. You're blessed. You're so excited every day to wake up to have the opportunity to do this. I'm one of those people, and I can already tell from you that you're so passionate about the game. You love it. It's not really a job. It's not an occupation. It's not a hobby. It's all in one. And so you're getting a chance, for me right now, which is incredible. I get paid to coach and scout basketball. How can I complain about that? And then go be around, some of the best athletes in the world, some of the best basketball minds in the world. So you're right on for sure. And I saw it with my father when he was coaching, right? I grew up in a basketball family where my dad was a coach and on the road and traveling, and my mom had to handle 2 kids and all of that.
Can you kind of touch on, I mean, obviously there was some great moments of the bubble. One of the ones that obviously sticks out is AD's game-winning 3 to go up 2-0 against the Nuggets. I don't know if that was one of your favorite moments, or maybe there was something in the finals. What kind of stood out to you?
Obviously the bubble was filled with a lot of ups and downs, right? On the court and off the court. To be transparent with you, I wasn't in the bubble the entirety of the playoffs, or the entirety of the bubble. I got in there a little later because the way they had it was there was different tiers in which you could enter. I was in Orlando the entirety of the time, but because we needed to have different medical groups in there, mental wellness, psychologists, different people in there, our entire coaching staff was not there its entirety. So obviously the AD shot was incredible, something that I know everybody remembers and something that, was a huge pivot point for us in that series. For me personally, just the finals itself was an incredible experience to be a part of. And, from a moment standpoint, I can't say that there was a individual moment that stood out more than others, but I can say with a lot of conviction, watching LeBron James get into a mindset of understanding that he was close to winning his 4th championship. He had that entire mindset. The whole purpose of the playoffs, the whole season was to win a championship. But to see the moment where he actually realized that he was close enough to touch it and taste it was incredible. After game 2, when we won game 2 of the finals and we're going into game 3, and obviously we ended up losing game 3, but just the focus level and the heightened sense of urgency that our staff, our coaches, our training staff, our players, everybody had was remarkable. You can't put that into words and you can't really put it down on paper, but LeBron James's focus level was second to none. And I think something that really raised our overall awareness in our locker room from both coaches and players. And I thought it was pretty cool to watch.
Of course, LeBron's always been heralded for his ability to focus and get the job done. But it's crazy to think about how this championship run for you guys had so much going for it, whether it was both LeBron's 4th championship, what the city of LA went through with the passing of Kobe Bryant. There was so much that you guys won this championship for.
Well, yeah, no. And John, you just touched on it. The whole entire season was a roller coaster ride. A lot of people forget about this. Our season started in China, and that was during the whole Daryl Morey Hong Kong situation. And while we were over in China, there was a suspension of play where we were sitting in our hotel lobby and looking out the window, and they're pulling down posters of Anthony Davis and Kyrie Irving off the wall. They're pulling our viewership. And I think you saw that didn't come back till the finals, where they were not broadcasting basketball over in China during any of that time. So we had a roller coaster ride of adversity. I think our group was built for that. I always give a ton of credit to Jeannie Buss and Rob Pelinka and Frank Vogel, our leadership group, but I really love to give a lot of credit to our players. And obviously we're led by LeBron, but we have Anthony Davis and Rondo and Jared Dudley and Dwight Howard and, Danny Green, just a group of veterans who understood what their purpose were. And they understood what we were trying to do on a day-to-day basis. And we really never had a ton of situations where we got too high or too low. And when I say that, meaning during our successes, but also during our times of stress, our levels of vulnerability and our levels of empathy, I thought were incredibly strong. And I thought that allowed us to truly be a good team and truly be a team that was able to come together during the bubble. Whereas there were some other teams that during the regular season maybe weren't as together or weren't as united. And when they were in the bubble, tried to create that chemistry, and it was too late. So I really give a lot of credit to all the people involved who did a phenomenal job navigating different points during the season where we had to make decisions on how we were going to push forward. And I give, a ton of credit, like I said, to our leadership group and also to LeBron. I thought was incredible.
That's super interesting, especially what you said at the beginning about how you guys had problems going back to the beginning of the season in China. Obviously not COVID related, but they're problems that aren't related to basketball, but they impact basketball so much in terms of stuff happening outside of the game that just completely changes whether or not you're going to play a game or whether or not you're going to have some time off, or whether like all of that stuff is dependent upon things that have nothing to do with stuff that happens on the hardwood.
We had 4 separate times where we were supposed to play a game that didn't get played. We had China, Kobe Bryant, COVID, and then in the bubble, the social injustice with the Milwaukee Bucks. So we had 4 separate times where our team was getting ready and focused to play and then pulled the string on it. And, if you go look around the NBA, that's never happened before, even close to anything like that. You look in baseball, there might be a rain delay or something of that nature, right? That happens here and there. But for us, our season really was, it was the longest season in NBA history. And, we had a group that from start to finish, people could say what they want. They can have opinions on how we did it and how we didn't do it, whatever. We really had, an incredible year from start to finish. And like I said, a lot of that started with a lot of that was attributed to how we started. And we started by saying we were going to be together. And little did we know we needed each other throughout the entire process, because all of those different things affect people differently, right? You talk about off the court, the ways in which Kobe Bryant's passing affected some of our players and some of our coaches and some of the people in our organization was just so strong. It was just such a monumental impact. And, from then on, you see the COVID, people have, family members that are impacted by it. So it affects them differently. We go to then what's going on with George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and all these situations around the country of social unrest and social injustice that impacts people differently as well and their motivation to play. So a lot of that came together as we were in the bubble is to figuring out your why, right? Really is why is your purpose of playing? Like, why are you here? And no two people was the same, but to be able to find all that, channel that together, push it in the same direction and be able to find a way to win was incredible.
Coach Greg, everything you've done so far up to this point is so amazing and so awesome in terms of these experiences you've had. Obviously, these are experiences that you didn't have these 10 years ago or so when you were first starting out. What's some advice you'd give to a 20-year-old Coach Greg that he knows what the end goal is but doesn't know how to get there?
It's a great question, John. And I've had these conversations with some people before about the ways in which to try to get into the NBA or the ways in which to pursue your goal. And I don't have all the answers, right? And there's not one way to skin a cat. I think the biggest thing is identifying your personality, right? And creating the self-awareness of understanding what you feel comfortable with and what you don't, and how you communicate and approach people is important. But I think the most important thing that I would tell myself is the difference between networking and connecting. And I think obviously when I was first coming out, my end goal was obviously be an NBA head coach or an NBA general manager at the time. I've really found that it's more important to have 5 to 10 people who can really advocate on your character, 5 to 10 people who you genuinely have a true connection with, who believe in you and trust in you and know your skills and capabilities, than having 55 to 60 people who know your name. And that was a huge thing for me. So me coming out, and if I were to talk to myself, a 20-year-old self, is identify the people that you can create a connection with and people that you're really curious to learn more about. Don't be reaching out to try to network and have them be familiar with who you are and what your name is and being able to help you get a job. The jobs will take care of themselves. Those opportunities will come over time. But I think the most important thing is trying to learn and grow. And, a phrase that my college coach used that I love is big ears, small mouth. Right. And that's a phrase he used to say all the time, is in a situation where you're with somebody who you think can give you knowledge and be able to help you grow and better yourself. That's the best thing to do. Big ears, small mouth. You sit there and take it all in, soak it in, open your mouth when, you have a question or you have things, that you think, might need some clarity. But in general, I really believe those things is having the self-awareness of who you are and how you want to get to where you want to get to and the route you want to try to attempt. What are you willing to do? Are you willing to live out of your car? Are you willing to do these things? Like you said, wake up early, like do a little bit of self-eval check and see what you're really about. And then B, when you're going through the process of trying to get help, because everybody needs help, everybody is trying to find the people you think could genuinely be there to help you grow and have that mentality. And I think I'm still doing that, right? Like I still have people that I reach out to commonly to try to pick their brains and become a better coach. And on the vice versa, on the same side, I have people reaching out who are trying to get advice. It's not a one-way street. You have to operate 2 ways and understand where you came from and where you're trying to get to. And I really genuinely believe that I don't think anybody's ever made it in this business without help from mentors and people who've gone before them.
Of course. And Coach Greg, that was fantastic advice. And it's something that I've been on LinkedIn for the last few months trying to get guests on the show. And I've always been thinking network. But it's so important to take a step back and say, how can I connect this person and make this a relationship that lasts beyond an hour-long podcast interview and goes into something further. So thank you so much for your time and coming on today. I know you've just gotten back from one of the craziest basketball experiences ever. Obviously, things were very hectic and still are for you. And there's so much work yet to be done for next season, whenever that is to come. So thank you so much for coming on. And I really can't wait to talk again soon, because I know that I can relate to you about basketball. We can talk hoops all day. So thank you so much.
No, it was my pleasure, man. It was great to be on here. You do a great job.
Thanks for listening to the Big Fellas Podcast. Check us out on all major social media platforms at Big Fellas Pod to join the chop up. You can also listen to us on every podcast platform on the planet. Stay tuned for the next episode, Big Fellas.